questions from our Chi Fleshi students, which I think is kind of reflective of the passage you just read, which was, what was it like for you growing up? Did you feel different because you're Native?
I did and I didn't. I mean, I didn't feel different at home, obviously. Or like even on the block I grew up on in Oakland, everyone was mixed race. Everyone was from two different things. There was a half Apache, half Mexican kid next door, and then there was like 7 families, and they were all from 2 different cultures. So like the kids I grew up around, I was different for being Native, maybe, but everyone was kind of like, you know, part of some kind of mixed race tribe. And then we'd go back to the reservation or the tribal jurisdiction land that my dad grew up on, and you know, that was family too. But school, even though Oakland is super diverse, there were not very many other Natives. There were my sisters, 2 older sisters, and there was usually 1 other kid in the whole school that I knew of. So I did feel different in the sense there was not a lot of Native kids in any of the school that I was ever in.
So how did you negotiate that?
I don't know.
Real deep here. Sorry.
You know, it only ever came up as kind of like a joke. Like that was the thing that they could make fun of me for. Like when I was really young, I just made fun of my last name being Orange. But luckily nothing rhymed with it, so you couldn't really do anything. And then, yeah, then it just became like, it's just a joke to people. People tend to dismiss. It's getting a little better, but how it was very dismissive of Native experience. So I don't know that I negotiated it. I mean, my dad came in the 2nd grade to kind of like try to teach around Thanksgiving time. The 1 month we're maybe talking about it. I feel more that I'm negotiating stuff now. I have an 8-year-old son at home, and we live in a rural area that's not very progressive, so they're still teaching stupid history. And so instead of like fighting the system and like getting angry at administrators and the curriculum, which you know, the first year that he was in school and they were doing this, we just pulled him out the whole week. But that didn't really feel like it was going to do anything that would help. So we brought in friends from Oakland who were powwow dancers and singers, and we had them present on powwow dancing and what it was. And the guy that was emceeing came with like jeans and a ball cap and a t-shirt, and he fields questions from kids, and they ask, like, they're just a mouthpiece of our culture, so they ask really bad questions because that's what they hear from their parents or from popular culture. And because it's kids, he's not going to make them feel stupid or judge them for bad questions. He sort of turns it into an educational moment. So this feels like a negotiation between systematic institutional lies and like positive change to like redirect a lot of that ignorance into, you know, kind of a teaching moment for the kids. So I feel like I was powerless as a kid to negotiate anything, but I feel like now that I can do something.
How did you know that you wanted to do such a historical prologue in your book?
I really hate historical fiction, and I don't even like history that much. I think a lot of times it's written from a certain perspective and like, over glorifies certain figures that I don't care about at all. But I knew I wanted a prologue to kind of define what being Native and being urban is, and I sort of got led into history accidentally. I started finding a common theme of Indian heads. So there's like at the Virginia colony, King Philip, which he was actually Metacomet, was his Indian name. They called him King Philip, and they called one of the early wars King Philip's War. Anyway, they killed him and put his head on the spike in front of Virginia colony for 25 years. It sat there as sort of like a victory marker. And in 1975, up until 1975, between like 1955 and 75 or something like that, maybe 60 to 75. This is when TV shows used to run out at night. If you can imagine, just stop. There's nothing. It's like turning on YouTube and like there's no videos to show, just for the night, and then in the morning it'll come on again. During that time period, they would have they call it test screen pattern, and it's like it looks like all these like circles and almost like sights on guns, like scopes. And there's an Indian head there, and it was there for like 15 years. Everyone would go to sleep to an Indian head test screen pattern thing, and maybe like a test tone, like just a long beeping sound. And nobody knows why it's there. Nobody knows the artist who put it there. Nobody knows why, how it ended up there. And that was just a super interesting thing to me, because there's Native people are such a foundational part of this country, and nobody wants to talk about it. This is sort of like the Indian head in the room while we sleep. Just seemed like a powerful image. So I just kept getting led back to this theme of Indian head, and it brought me into history. So I hadn't planned on doing it. It's a long way of saying I didn't plan on doing it.
What made you want to become a writer?
Reading, I think, but I didn't know I wanted to be a writer when I was young. I wasn't very good in school. Got kicked out of high school, and I was very much into roller hockey, which in the 90s was a thing. It was a professional team in Oakland, and we started playing on the streets, and then they built a rink, and I got very serious about that. And I was not particularly encouraged to do any good in school. The family was kind of a mess, and so we were just like holding it together. Early 2000s, everyone realized that rollerblading looked super dorky and stopped doing it, and the sport died. And my dreams too. And I became a musician. I went to school for sound engineering. And this was right before the MP3 and the digital age of music completely made analog recording irrelevant, which is all that I learned in school. So another dream died. And I was working at a used bookstore, reading religion and philosophy, just like lost. Like just had 2 periods of my life sort of crumble beneath me. And I stumbled into fiction and reading novels, and found for the first time when I was like 22 or 23 that I loved literature. And after reading a certain amount, falling in love with the novel specifically as a form, I knew I wanted to try to do it. And then, many, many years of playing catch up, because, a lot of people know when they're younger that they want to write. So when I knew for sure, but it took a while to get there. The first ones were kind of weird and obscure, and I don't know how much you all would like them, but there's a guy from Prague named Kafka. His most famous story is about a guy who wakes up and he's a cockroach. You might like that story. And then it's about him in his room, and his sister's trying to help him not be seen by his parents, and it's a very weird, darkly funny story. And this guy, Jorge Luis Borges from Argentina, is a really great writer, and he's also weird. And then this book, Confederacy of Dunces by John Kennedy Toole, it was like one of the first novels that I loved, because it was so funny and so sad at the same time. And I've never known an art form to be able to hold those 2 things in such a clear and strong way. And then Sylvia Plath's Bell Jar was another one that was an early. These aren't recommendations necessarily. This is just like what I was reading at the time that I found.
Hi, I like your necklace. Okay, how does it feel, like, describe in 3 words how you feel knowing so many people have read your book?
3?
Yeah. Or 4.
It feels vulnerable.
Ah, that's a nice one.
I feel exposed.
That's a good
Okay, so if you seen your past self, you as a child, what would you tell them as of right now if they were sitting right in front of you?
Me as a child?
Yeah, like if they were sitting like right there in front of your face, what would you tell them like not to worry about, or like you're going to be okay, stuff like that?
I'd probably tell them that the world's not going to end because I grew up evangelical Christian. My mom was, my dad was Native American church ceremony, so it was kind of like, my mom's white, my dad's Native, so there was just a war in the house and a spiritual war. But I didn't think I would become an adult as a kid, because the evangelical church teaches everyone the world's going to end, and you better believe in Jesus, because if you don't, you're going to hell forever. And so, like, I didn't necessarily believe in Jesus, but I don't want to suffer for eternity. So I'd probably like tell the kid, like, don't worry, the world's not going to end. You will become an adult, so pay more attention in school.
Have you ever had like problems with like a native side saying that like you're not native because you're not full native, you're white side saying you're not white because you're not full white? Like, have you had problems with that?
I mean, when we would go back to where my dad grew up, we were very much like city Indians and like kind of seen as less than. And then more of what happened in Oakland was that like people were racist toward me for thinking I was Mexican or Chinese. So it wasn't like attacks from the native world or against the native world for me being native. It was like mistaken identity, racism is its own thing. And then when I started working in the native community in Oakland, so many people are mixed race, and half is, I've known a lot of people that are like 16th, 8th, 32nd, and I've seen their struggles. They struggle a lot more with it. But having like a super native dad, and knowing, like, being confident in my own heritage has helped a lot, to not feel insecure, and it helps that I was never necessarily attacked too. But the struggle is real for sure.
So this might be a really stupid question, but like, are there any other events that led to you wanting to make this book?
It led to what?
You wanting to write this book?
Two-part question.
How old are you?
I'm 37.
You look young.
Thank you. So I'm answering about the event, any other events. I think just working in the Native community in Oakland and knowing that nobody was telling this story, and there aren't also very many Oakland books. There's almost no like novels set in Oakland that represent what Oakland's like, especially like contemporary. So I was just really wanting to, I knew I wanted to write a novel. I didn't know what about for many years. And after working in the community for a long time, I knew I wanted to write about both of those experiences, being Native and about Oakland and what those two things mean together. But there was no events necessarily.
What were you thinking when the book first got published?
Like when the publisher bought it, it was pretty overwhelming. Do you all know who Sarah Jessica Parker is? So I got a text from my agent. It was supposed to go to auction, which means like people bid, a bunch of publishers bid on the book. There was a lot of buzz around it, and my agent sent me a text message saying, "This is going to be the strangest text message I've ever sent, but Sarah Jessica Parker wants to talk to you." So I was like, well, I don't even know what this means. And she's trying to start her own publishing, what's called an imprint, and she wanted to acquire my book. And And so she was part of this auction bidding war that went on for like a week, and then it sold. And yeah, it was, I don't know what I was thinking. It was pretty incredible and overwhelming. And I was super grateful that something I worked really hard on for a long time. I was actually getting paid for it. Getting paid for art is a big deal from small level to big.
What's one bit of advice you could give to someone who wants to be a writer?
I think because I started off as an athlete and then musician, I was able to see in a very clear way that you put in hours and you see results. I was always putting in extra time. I worked at the hockey rink. I was a janitor at the hockey rink to pay for my league fees that I played at. And I was there all the time. And I was like devoted to putting in the work. And then when I became a musician, I knew how much work it took to get good. I played guitar and piano, and sort of put in the same devotion and hours and saw results. So by the time I decided on writing, the same thing. I read as much as I could, and I wrote every day as much as I could. And a lot of times writing is more like we sit around waiting for the muse to visit us, or we wait for inspiration, or we're blocked. But I think an approach much more like it's a discipline. Like a painter becomes really good at painting from painting a lot. And I think sometimes writing falls into this field of like, you're good or you're not. And it's a disciplined artwork, a form of art. And I think bringing that thinking to it instead of do I have talent or not is a better way to approach it.
What about the quote by Gertrude Stein inspired you so much that you had to make? Excuse me, I'm sorry. What about the quote by Gertrude Stein inspired you so much you named your book after?
So this quote, "There is no there there," this is from her novel called Everybody's Autobiography. So I was just looking for quotes from authors that grew up in Oakland about Oakland, and there's not that many. It's her and Jack London are the main known ones. But as soon as I read that, just something about it I knew related to the theme of my novel. So what she was talking about is she grew up her childhood in Oakland on like a farm, and she came back as an adult after leaving as a teenager, and it was completely developed over, and it was no longer recognizable. So in her book, somebody's asking, why don't you write about Oakland? And she says, there is no there there. She's just talking about she can't recognize, there's no more like the there there of my childhood is gone. So I immediately read it as having a resonance to Native experience, and the characters are sort of trying to think about their environment, and if it doesn't look like what it's supposed to look like as it's been depicted, like we're in the wild, like we're in an Arizona desert floor, or like a mountain in New Mexico, or all these different stereotypical environments that we're allowed to be in a canoe along a river or whatever. They're trying to find the there of their environment, and it's all about their struggle with that. And also, the land as it once was before is completely developed over in a city, and it's unrecognizable. So there was just a lot of resonances that when I read the sentence that I knew would be perfect. And so then just finding where was the title within that quote was a little bit tricky, but eventually I landed on there.
Hi. So I was just wondering, who was your biggest supporter throughout writing your book?
My wife. She worked in the Native community for many years. She's a psychologist. And I thought of the book, it's like 2 weeks after I became, I found out I was going to become a father. And the whole premise for all these lives converging at a powwow at the Oakland Coliseum, that was the basic idea. But then I was becoming a father, so I did not start writing it year after becoming a father. And then I was still working full time, and so I'd get up at like 5 in the morning and write for 3 hours, and then like right when my son went to sleep at night. And so during that first year of writing, when our son went to sleep, I would read to her on our back porch in West Oakland these characters as they were coming to life. And she's a very tough critic, and so she would sort of like tell me if it wasn't working, but she would also like praise me if it was. And she knew the community, and so she was just a very big supporter. And eventually I stopped working full time and started contracting. And she believed in the book enough that like I wasn't earning my keep, but she could make enough for us to be able to, for me to go to school and get my MFA and then finish the book and work where I could. But so support her in both in the sense of like emotional and praising support, but also financial, practical support.
Okay, so I know that you talk a lot about like the struggles that you have to overcome as a native when you were a child or any other time. Can you tell us about a little bit about positive aspects of being a native, like the things that you really love, enjoy, and proud of?
Well, I mean, I think there's a lot of native writers that I love, and the way that I've been inspired to write, and they've done a lot of work to make way for younger writers like me. The dancing and the music is really beautiful. My dad sings. My dad knows like thousands of songs in Native American church, and I grew up around the kettle drum, which is what they use in Native American church ceremonies. It's a very particular sound to it. You know, I love many aspects of the culture, and there's a lot of values that are specific to Cheyenne culture that you wouldn't necessarily think of as to be tribally specific, like a cultural value, but like generosity is something that's really big in my tribe and in a lot of tribes. And so like there's the spirit of generosity in the way it's expressed, has been expressed in my family and in our tribe is something I'm really proud of. Yeah, I mean I hate to always be talking about the struggle, but there's no way around it because it's a reality. So what I tried to balance in the book was to bring beauty and have a beauty balance with some of the darker aspects of the book as a positive way to have it not be necessarily like totally sad.
Okay, so my question is like, how do you feel about how history represents Indians and Native people and stuff?
I think it's done a really bad job. It's either ignored or it's talked about in a very false, sugar-coated way. Like there was some kind of like very happy, peaceful meal, and then eternal friendship from that. And that's some of the language they use in history was like to symbolize eternal friendship. And you know that when you know all of the history and what happened like immediately after those meals, they were like celebrating massacres. The Thanksgiving meals that happened after the first one were celebrations of successful massacres. So just the very premise of having like a Native American Heritage Month in November when we celebrate Thanksgiving, and that you continue, that schools continue this sugar-coated version of history to try to make ourselves feel better about the foundation of the country is really, it's not a good place to start dialogue about people that aren't beneficiaries of history, but actually have suffered from it over many, many generations.
When you were writing the book, how did you get through your writer's block when you were doing the book?
If I was feeling like uninspired and like I didn't want to write or like destructive about my own work, I would do this thing where I would like turn myself into an intern and like make myself do all of the busy, tedious, meticulous work that I don't want to do when I feel inspired. So one of those things was like switching from first person to third person. This is like a very tedious thing and technical thing. You're just going in and changing little parts of sentences, so it goes from I to he or she. And I would assign myself all sorts of annoying tasks to keep myself working on the work. So that's one of the ways to get through that I use.
So my question is, what is the message that you want to transmit by your writing?
I don't know if I have something boiled down. I think I want the book to feel hopeful even while staring a kind of oblivion in the face, to keep hope regardless, and to see the strengths and beauty of a people, even while addressing stuff that's not usually addressed. And talking about lives that are messy and in ways that are honoring of those lives at the same time.
First, I just want to say I really liked the style of your writing. I liked how there was some serious and very eye-opening aspects, but there was a twinge of humor in there, which I feel just like even just hearing you talk now, I can tell that means that there's so much of you, yourself, in this book. But second, I'm just wondering, because you said it took you 6 years to write this book, is that correct? Just throughout this writing process and just putting so much of your time and so much of yourself in this, how do you feel like this has changed you as a writer and as a person?
Luckily, I don't feel changed as a writer. I still struggle with believing in my own writing, and I still, it hasn't gone to my head. I still struggle just as much as I did before. As a person, I'm like doing this all the time, and this is like crazy. It's not something I ever wanted to do. Before I sold the book and went on when the book came out, I went on like a 30-day book tour across the country. I was doing like a reading thing every night. That felt pretty awful for a while because I'd never done it, and then I was doing it every night. But now I'm like used to it, and it allows me to be like a full-time writer, and it's totally worth it. And I love events like this. So it's changed me in the sense that like I can do something I never wanted to do and never would have asked to do. In the sense that I worked through something very hard and came out of it okay. I don't have to worry about money anymore. That's like a big part of my life before. I don't have to stress about money. It's just all my life, that's what money meant, was stress and not having it. So that's like, that's no small thing. That's like a life condition that's not necessarily like a part of me, but me not being stressed a lot means I'm different.
I think we have time for one more.
Did you have any other ideas for other characters or no?
I did. There's a whole bunch of other characters that didn't make it. Probably like up to 50 during the 6 years, and then there were 15 when I got to my editor's desk, and she said you have to cut 3. So it ended up at 12.
Okay. I think we're gonna wrap up now. And before we say goodbye, we do have a few gifts for you. We want to say thank you for your time and for coming here.
Thank you.
We have a couple of different mugs. Specifically, then we have some candies that are mostly local.
This is from our UWT. We hold a Lashutsi language immersion here, which is the indigenous language of, and then there's a mug in there as well. I don't want to cause a stampede, but Tommy has offered to sign books if you guys are interested. I'm just gonna hide behind a desk or something if that's what you want to do. Okay.